I've looked through the eyes of many prisoners, predators, cannibals, the absolute scum of humanity, people willing to slice someone's throat open with a smile, just out of pure joy that they can see a body thrashed in its final stages before death takes over. I pride myself on being able to hold my composure when dealing with monsters like that. But looking into the eyes of Marcus was unsettling in a very different way. It shook me to my core. His eyes were ice blue, unblinking but not unfeeling. The look in them was a distant, distracted gaze of anguish, far from anything I had ever encountered. That was the first time Officer Nikolai Jarvie laid eyes on Marcus Fenix. He wasn't a rookie. He wasn't easily rattled. He was in fact a ranking officer inside of Hesketh Prison, otherwise known as the Slab to the outside world. And that quote would come to define not just Marcus's arrival, but his entire prison sentence. From the very beginning, Marcus was an anomaly. The guards had expected someone else to arrive from the front. On paper, they knew who he was, that he was the son of Adam Fenix, a veteran of the Pendulum Wars turned defense scientist. They knew Marcus's sentence was 40 years, effectively a death warrant in a facility where most inmates didn't make it past 2 years. In fact, hitting 2 years was a milestone, one to be celebrated as you beat the statistics. But to be fair, nothing really made sense anymore. The slab continuing to run at a time where humanity was on the brink of extinction was an oddity in of itself, but that was less important than Marcus and the orders he came with, where pretty much everybody that was brought here was expected to die and wither away. Marcus came with specific orders. The staff of the slab were ordered to keep him alive, no matter what. And in addition to that, they were to supply weekly reports directly to the chairman's office, with those reports keeping accurate, detailed information on Marcus's weight, his vitals, and possibly most important of all, his psychological status. It was almost as if Marcus was being monitored more akin to a specimen than just a regular inmate, let alone in a place where inmates usually just dealt with each other. Needless to say, his treatment and being sent here overall was just weird. Apart from the weekly reports, Marcus even being here didn't make any sense. The military usually handled their own cases. The slab was a civilian prison. The military usually handled their own court-martials and their own executions, which was a sentence Marcus should have got for the charges brought up against him. Due to the inability to make heads or tails of all of this, the staff of the slab began to imagine a rich, frail, scared kid who came from old wealthy money that saved him from a firing squad, despite him running away from a fight that cost the coalition Eyphra, and in turn continuing to be a liability here, creating a security nightmare for the prison staff, which was only about 13 people strong, against 43 of the worst killers the COG's degenerative side ever raised. He was a deserter that should have been left to rot. Besides, he wouldn't last a week in here. He was supposed to be weak, afraid, soft, and surrounded by the worst scum the COG had ever locked away. Guarded by a skeleton crew of just 13 men, there's no way in hell they could defend him. That was the version of Marcus Fenix they had prepared for. But then they saw him. And whatever version they'd imagined, whatever frail son of privilege they thought was walking through those gates was obliterated on sight. The man that arrived was a monster in human form, towering, almost as if he was cut from stone, all dense muscle beneath a thin, sweat-worn prison singlet that clung to a body shaped by years of war. His hair was jet black, shaved down brutally close to the scalp. His face was hard, scarred, and hollowed by something that looked like it had no name, something heavier than rage, yet caught in regret. He didn't flinch, didn't speak, didn't even scan the room. His eyes didn't reflect fear or arrogance, just a kind of deadened gravity, as if whatever fight had once lived inside him and long since burned out, leaving only the weight of what he'd carried to get here. That was when Nico understood. Marcus wasn't going to be torn apart for being weak or soft. He was in fact going to be challenged, but in an entirely different way. Because his presence here, and him being as massive as he was, would disturb the entire food chain. The slab was ruled by predators, men who thrived on fear, on dominance, on testing the boundaries of one another, and a new inmate usually set them into a frenzy. Whistles, threats, provocations, that was the usual greeting. And since the slab hadn't received any new prisoners since before E-Day, there's no telling the reception Marcus would have gotten.
This building used to be a beautiful place. There's a lot of history here. A lot of lies, too.
Well, you've got some nerve, soldier. I know all about your trial.
His trial was a sham, sir.
When the Locust overran Chancery Bridge and most of Eyphra, the city's heart was effectively lost. The front lines had been redrawn in blood and in rubble, and as the smoke cleared, what remained was a cruel irony that didn't escape Dom. Nearly all of Eyphra had fallen, except for the northern district. It was the last untouched stretch of the city, which happened to be the home of the Coalition's official buildings and government offices. Somehow, the courthouse still stood, which meant they had a place to hold a trial for Marcus, a proper one. On paper anyways. In truth, nothing about Marcus's court-martial felt proper. Nothing felt normal. The COG's defenses were shattered, communications were frayed all across the board, and the corridors of that old building felt more like a mausoleum than a seat of justice. The official charges brought up against Marcus was dereliction of duty and misuse of COG assets. In other words, he defied Hoffman's orders to reinforce Chancery Bridge. Then he punched him out, and decided to take a Raven with his own squad to go and save his father from being killed or taken by the Locust. Chancery was overrun, Eyphra was lost, and Marcus's attempt to save his father ended in failure as well. And that was where the current cards laid. Dom was still trying to understand the whole picture, but he couldn't get past where he found himself now. For a war hero or any significant court-martial, there was barely any personnel within this building. Almost as if it was just enough to keep up appearances, as if they mattered to anyone anymore. Dom sat alone in one of the waiting corridors, preparing to testify on Marcus's behalf. It was his job to provide a character witness, though he wasn't even sure what that meant anymore either. The process was rushed, it all felt fractured, improvised, disconnected from anything that can be remotely considered official, especially by the high standards of the Coalition. And his thoughts weren't only on the trial. Dom hadn't spoken to Marcus since the failed extraction at Haldane Hall, and Marcus hadn't been the same after that. He's been dazed, he was erratic, barely coherent, far from the calm and collected man Dom has seemed to know his entire life. And after the charges were brought down, Marcus was placed under constant armed watch. Hoffman made sure of that, which cut off any chances for Dom to reach Marcus. And then there was another question that was gnawing at him. Where the hell was Ty or Jace? Since the mission, he hasn't seen Ty Calisto or Jace Stratton. The two of them went along with Dom and Marcus on the rescue attempt, although neither of them had been called in to testify on Marcus's behalf. And yet, that still wasn't the strangest part. Out of all 4 men who went into Haldane Hall, none had requested a case evac, yet somehow a Raven had shown up almost immediately to pull them out of it. It all remained a giant, quiet mystery that no one seemed eager to explain, and just prodded around the main topic on everyone's minds. The fact that Marcus Fenix, the most devout and exemplary soldier the COG still had, went AWOL. Dom's mental spiral was finally broken when Hoffman appeared. His commanding officer looked tired, weathered in a way that had nothing to do with combat fatigue, and worse yet, he wouldn't meet Dom's eyes. It was immediately apparent to Dom that Hoffman was not proud of any of this. Yes, Hoffman was the one that was responsible for Marcus being placed under lockdown, and he was the one that brought the charges down on top of Marcus, as well as being the sole one responsible who ensured Dom and Marcus couldn't exchange even a word, but that didn't mean he was proud or happy about any of it. If anything, he looked as devastated as Anya. As Dom would discover in a few seconds, Marcus's famous way of saying little to nothing and bottling up had managed to find a way to punish all of them here. But at least Hoffman could offer something a little more relieving, right? Desperate for some kind of clarity of this entire situation, Dom stepped before his commanding officer, his voice low and restrained. He asked if there was anything he could be told. Anything that wouldn't interfere with the hearing, as he was well aware that that was still being respected, as if it all still mattered. As CL didn't answer right away. He just fiddled with the brim of his hat and looked toward the ceiling, and Dom had seen that look before. That was Hoffman's tell, his embarrassment gesture, the one he gave when there was no good answer. After a few moments of silence, still refusing to meet Dom's eyes, Hoffman eventually exhaled and muttered the only thing he could manage to put together himself. An apology, a quiet, broken one. He said he wanted to fix it, that it had all spiraled beyond his control. And then came the last words he spoke before just walking away. "I'm sorry, this isn't going to end happily." Those words gutted Dom. They weren't given dramatically or in any grand way, but it was just hearing Hoffman, the most hard-edged, by-the-book officer Dom had ever served under, say something like that. It hit deeper than any battlefield wound Dom had ever received could. And he had never heard Hoffman speak that way before, not even during their worst firefights together. It was the quiet defeat in his voice that really sold it to Dom. As Hoffman walked away, almost as if intentionally to give Dom and Anya a moment alone, Dom didn't waste it. He turned to Anya, who similarly hadn't met Dom's eyes this entire time. He pleaded with her, desperate for something, anything to ground him, to give him some kind of insight, to give him some kind of hope that they can find a way to pull Marcus out of this. He didn't care about legal restrictions, law be damned. He knew that Anya was a witness to Marcus's AWOL, to everything, and that there were rules about what she could say, but he needed to know. And Marcus told her anything, explained why he did it. Can she give her any insight herself? Can she explain what the hell happened? Similar to Hoffman, Anya hesitated. She chewed her lip a little bit, and then slowly, she fell apart. She told him the truth. Marcus refuses to talk to her. She had been allowed to visit him, but he refused to see her. He wouldn't say a word, wouldn't explain his actions, and worst of all, he pled guilty. He accepted the charges that had been presented before him. He gave no defense, he gave no context, absolutely no attempt to justify what happened or why he did what he did. This was a development that was both aggravating and heartbreaking, because Anya was in a very unique position herself. She had been there. She had seen Marcus punch Hoffman, disobey direct orders, and leave. She knew personally that Marcus had done what he did, but even then, there was no hard evidence to really present before the court. There technically was no way to build a solid case. Even if she and Hoffman were willing to stand together, which was still a possibility here, and they decided together to testify in Marcus's defense, the two of them could arguably give Marcus a way out. Sounds like good news. But there's that difficult roadblock of Marcus not fighting it. He accepted all of the charges, no contest. He was handing himself over on a silver platter, and they all knew what that meant. Marcus was assigning himself death by firing squad. In this revelation, Dom felt the blood drain from his face. He refused to accept it. He told her they'd figure something out. There had to be a way. But then Anya asked him something that stopped him cold. She looked at him, not with anger, but with confusion, and asked if he knew what Marcus was doing that day. She said when it all happened, when Marcus disobeyed Hoffman and told him, "Fuck you," he didn't appear to be himself at all. Anya had never seen him that way. It was like something else had taken over him, and she had never seen him like that. Did Dom know? Had Marcus told him anything? Dom felt guilty. He hadn't expected that question, and now he's gonna put it out there. It made him feel like he was abandoning Marcus just by answering it truthfully, because in truth, he didn't know. Marcus hadn't told him anything, not before they boarded the Raven, not even as they made their way to Haldane Hall. He had taken Dom, Ty, and Jace with him under the pretense of a mission, but he never explained that he was acting on his own volition, that he was disobeying a direct order, that instead of reinforcing a desperate gear unit at Chancery Bridge, he was flying across the city to save his father. He went to AWOL, misused a COG asset, lied by omission, and brought his closest brothers with him into an unsanctioned op during the fall of Eyphra. Dom's thoughts began to spiral again. He was grasping at straws now. Maybe there was still a way to appeal. Maybe he could see Prescott. Maybe the sentence wasn't final. Maybe they could stall the execution. And if it was all final, who the hell was going to volunteer for the firing squad? No gear would raise a rifle against Marcus Fenix. Everybody knew who he was, and nobody would shoot him willingly. As Dom began to justify his feelings of Marcus being okay, he was interrupted by a fellow gear. It was time for Dom to be brought before the court to provide a character witness on Marcus's behalf. Since Marcus had pleaded guilty, there wasn't much left to really say or ultimately do. There was no drawn-out trial, no cross-examinations, just one last desperate attempt to salvage what little was left. And now that burden fell to Dom. This character witness testimony that felt less like a chance to help and more like a final confession was one last swing at saving a man who had already handed himself to the gallows, essentially. When Dom was finally called into the room, everything about it felt off, though. The place didn't resemble a courtroom so much as it did a half-abandoned gymnasium in need of a fresh coat of paint. The room was stark, hollow, cold, and at the far end, seated behind a plain, unremarkable table, were the 3 officers serving as Marcus's judge, jury, and, if it came to it, executioners. Dom couldn't help but notice that none of them looked eager. If anything, they looked like they hated being there. Similar to Anya and Hoffman, they avoided eye contact with everybody in the room. They seemed restless within their seats, and postures stiff with discomfort, almost as if it was all just a giant formality, with no real investment in any of this. And that was the main thing Dom picked up on. It was clear this wasn't really about justice anymore, it was a formality. A box to be checked off before burying a gear who had already buried himself. The prosecutor sat off to the side, at one of 2 right-angled tables facing each other. He didn't look any more invested either. His eyes wandered, fingers tapping at the table like he cared more about its grain than the case before him. And why wouldn't he? Marcus already confessed. There was no argument to make, no defense to dismantle, just a name to stamp and a sentence to provide. And then there was Marcus. No do-rag, no armor, no bravado. Just this number 2 dress uniform that didn't sit quite right on him, as if it knew it didn't belong. And Marcus himself looked smaller somehow, less like the man Dom had bled beside and more like a prisoner already halfway gone. He sat alone, distant, like he'd made peace with whatever was coming next. Dom continued to scan the room, noting the sterile lighting, the unfamiliar faces. He didn't recognize a single soul. After all the years, over 15, all the deployments, all the lives laid down for this very system, this was it? This was the room they used to decide a man's life? Some half-forgotten chamber with peeling paint and bad acoustics? A group of half-invested individuals that neither Marcus or Dom had ever seen throughout their long military service, both in the Pendulum Wars and now in the fight for survival against the Locust? It began to upset him, but no matter how angry he got, he couldn't stop the main thought that kept coming through. This is it? This is all that they're giving him? God Almighty. After swearing in and pledging his oath to the Coalition, Dom was asked to begin his character testimony. Everything he was about to say was now official, on record, binding, legally, truth under penalty. Now, Dom had actually brought notes. He had them tucked away within his armor, just in case his nerves got the better of him, as history has proven to be a pretty solid pattern with him. And in this case, he was worried that he would forget something important that might make the difference between life and death of his best friend. But when the moment came, he actually didn't reach for them. He felt he didn't need them. What mattered now wasn't perfectly crafted sentences, it was honesty, the raw truth, straight from the heart. So Dom looked up, he steadied his voice, and he began. He spoke of Marcus's service, of the commendations everyone in the room already knew, how Marcus had earned the Embry Star, how he fought on the front lines from the moment he was old enough to enlist. He didn't trade on his name or his father's legacy. He never pulled rank. Didn't act like he was above the rest of them because he came from a founding family. He was just a gear, like the rest of them, and he bled for the cog more times than Dom could ever count. He was always the first to throw himself into the line of fire to protect a squad mate or a civilian. And then he looked dead in the eyes in the military tribunal and said that it suited this tribunal, hell, it suited Chairman Prescott, to reap the rewards of every smart weapon Adam Fenix had ever built. But when it came time to pass judgment on the man who tried to protect that top assets, they were more ready to wash their hands of him, and that wasn't right. Everyone in this room was hyper-focused on Marcus going AWOL, on supposedly protecting his father. But Adam Fenix was a top member within the Coalition, and that's something everyone in this room needs to remember. Dom's closing arguments of his character testimony was this. My brother Carlos died saving Marcus's life, and I would too, in a heartbeat. Without Marcus, we wouldn't have the Hammer of Dawn. Half of us would never be here. Maybe none of us. Thank you, sir. In conclusion to his testimony, silence filled the room. It was cold and unsettlingly heavy. Not a silence of awe or reflection, but of bureaucracy. Dom expected them to deliberate, to take even a second to consider what he'd said, but they didn't. They passed notes to each other like bored students, barely lifting their heads. Dom stared at them, his jaw clenched, waiting for some hint of reaction, but none of them even glanced in his direction. Upset with the lack of acknowledgement, Dom decided to turn his eyes towards Marcus. And for the first time in that room, just for a second, no more, their eyes met. And in that single moment, Dom's heart was ripped out, because for the first time in 10 years of war and a lifetime of friendship, Dom couldn't read Marcus's face. He didn't see anger or defiance or even shame. He saw nothing. Just a man hollowed out, old before his time, tired, broken, like someone who didn't care what the hell was going to happen to him next. Someone who just wanted it to be over. Marcus had checked out, and that terrified Dom. Maybe he had cracked. Maybe all the ghosts they'd buried had finally caught up with him. One day or another, the horrors of war and PTSD and everything else will catch up to all of them, and maybe Marcus was just the first to break. Then the tribunal spoke again. Their voices flat, distant, as if Dom's testimony had never really happened. The verdict landed like a hammer. It wasn't death. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison. With that sentence, court was adjourned, with no other way to argue against it. The matter was settled. Dom was frozen. It wasn't clemency, it was cruelty wrapped in red tape. A quieter kind of execution. One that didn't end with a firing squad, but a slow fade into absolutely nothing. There was only one prison that was still operating left within the Cog's hands. Not just in Eyphra, but all of the territory that the Cog still controlled. Hesketh, the slab. But to everyone outside of the prison, they all knew what that meant. You can call it Hesketh Penitentiary, you can call it the slab, but many people refer to it as the end of the road. The one no one survived. Not really. If you were lucky to make it 2 years before the disease, the isolation, or the other inmates finished the job. And most never even hit the 2-year mark. Marcus wasn't going to prison, he was going to die. Slowly. Alone and in the dark. Dom turned to him, searching for any trace of resistance, some flash of anger, a flicker of protest, but Marcus didn't move. He didn't speak, he didn't even blink. He really did look hollowed out, like someone who had long been waiting for the sweet release of death, and was being punished more for having to wait just a little while longer. 2 MPs would come in at that moment. There was no exchange of words or looks or anything else, just pure efficiency. They walked past Dom and positioned themselves on either side of Marcus like they were retrieving an object. A civil service gear moved toward Dom at the same time, motioning him toward the door with all the warmth of a closing cell. Marcus still wouldn't look up. That one time that he met Dom's eyes was enough. He wouldn't do it again. He wouldn't give Dom a chance to carry even a fraction of the load that was now on his shoulders. In this moment, the two of them were being separated like it was just another formality, another line in a report. As Dom watched Marcus stand up and be escorted away, his chest tightened. This couldn't be the last moment. Not after everything they'd fought through. Not after all the bodies, the years, the silence they'd endured together, all the pain, the loss of Marcus's mother, of their brother, Carlos. As Dom was being walked out by the civil service gear, he stopped. He turned to the gear and refused to move. He asked, not softly, not politely, but kind of demanded that he see Marcus one more time. It was a demand that came not out of anger or regret, but more so loss, a desperation. He needed the closure. The gear paused for a moment, and then out of the blue, she asked if he was the Dominic Santiago, the one from Asphalt Point, Special Forces, the same name whispered in field hospitals and outposts since the end of the Pendulum Wars. The man who fought beside Marcus Fenix to help end that war. Dom nodded quietly, confirming it. Said he earned the Embry Star during that raid. That revelation was all this gear needed. She didn't smile, but her tone softened in reception to Dom, and she admitted that nobody in this room said it out loud. That whatever was happening to Marcus, it wasn't anger, it wasn't rebellion. It was all shame. A deep, suffocating embarrassment. He was their best gear that they had. And they lost the capital because of him. She told Dom not to be so angry with everyone that had a part in all of this. It's a tragedy all around, but they need to save face. The Cog's very existence depends on it. She would lead him down a long corridor marked detention area. The walls were sterile, the air still. They passed through a string of reinforced doors, each one thicker than the last. At the final checkpoint, she paused and told him not to take too long. He moved out of the way for Dom to go inside this room. When Dom opened the door, he realized that he was stepping into the holding lobby, and Marcus was already there, locked behind reinforced glass, staring at the floor. His hands were laced behind his back, his stance wide and uneven, like he'd been standing that way too long. Still, silent, detached, almost as if mentally he was somewhere else. Dom stood there before him. He waited for a minute. There was no response, no acknowledgement, no eye contact. But to hell with it, this won't be the last time he sees Marcus. At least not in this way. Dom opened up with an apology. He said he didn't know that would be the ruling, that he had just wanted to help. He thought telling the truth, speaking from his heart, would be enough. That Marcus's record alone should have been enough. No one's given more to the Coalition than Marcus, and they should have been able to see that. They should have been able to see that for over 10 years of fighting, humans and then the Locust were only people. And they should have been able to see the humanity in Marcus breaking down, or seeing some kind of justification or explanation as to why he did what he did. It wasn't as if he shot another gear or went on a killing spree. There was nothing so heinous. But Dom's words were met with nothing. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't blink, still staring at the floor like he was trying to disappear into it. Dom's words started to tremble. He was unsure of what to say next. What the hell can you say? He doesn't know what's been going through Marcus's head in the last couple of days, let alone this entire ordeal that just unfolded before his own eyes. Had he really mentally checked out? Is he just beating himself up? How do you get someone to acknowledge you, to explain, to talk? He didn't know what to do, or what to say that'll cut through this silence. Prison or not, if Marcus turned away from him, he had no idea what he would do. He didn't think he could handle it, so he pleaded. He begged Marcus to just look at him, say something, anything. He brought up Anya, how Marcus had refused to see her, and how that would destroy her. He couldn't just shut everyone out, not like this, not after everything. What did he expect Dom to tell her? That Marcus was just gone? That he buried himself alive? And that she's supposed to just move on? What the hell was Dom supposed to do? And finally, Marcus looked up. But it wasn't the man Dom knew. In all the years of the Pendulum Wars through the bloodbath with the war against the Locust, Dom had never seen Marcus like this. Even after losing Carlos, even after watching cities burn and friends die screaming, Marcus had always carried forward. It broke him sometimes, yeah, but he continued. Now, there was nothing left to carry. Marcus's eyes were glassy, almost vacant, and in just a few days, he looked like he'd aged a decade. The trial, the disgrace, the fall of Eyphra, the burden of filling the gears, losing his father, it had all finally crushed him. He told Dom to let Anya go, to tell her to forget he ever existed, move on, don't remember him like this. He said the same to Dom. He wanted no visits, no letters, nothing. He meant it. He wants them both to move on. He didn't want to be remembered at all. Without thinking, without planning, Dom snapped back. He told him to cut the shit out. This wasn't over. They'd already kept him off the execution list. There was still room to maneuver. Dom swore he'd get him out of prison, swore as if his own life depended on it. But underneath the defiance was desperation, because Dom wasn't just trying to wake Marcus up, he was trying to stop himself from falling apart too. Marcus never said how he felt, never really let anyone in. Dom had spent a lifetime trying to guess what was going on in that head, and he'd finally gotten pretty damn good at it. But this, hearing him give up, seeing him like this, it was tearing out his heart. Dom would ask Marcus, if he wanted him to forget about Marcus, how the hell can he do that? How can he be okay with Marcus rotting away in that shithole? And Marcus stood up, in the old, familiar tactic of quietly getting people to shut up. You see, ever since Marcus was a kid, his towering demeanor was something that he always employed quite effectively, to stand in such a way where he dominated over anybody, and he did so now. For the first time since Dom entered the room, he rose to full height and locked eyes with him. There was something deliberate in it, like he was memorizing Dom's face though, fixing it into place as if this would be the last time he ever saw it. Like he wanted to hold on to this one piece of his life before it was buried for good. In other words, this wasn't him trying to terrify Dom. It was him trying to cherish his best friend. One last time. You'll be okay, Marcus said quietly, because I'm asking you to. Do this for me, and take care of Anya. He turned away without waiting for a reply, and walked to the cell door, raised his fist, knocked once, firm and final. The sound echoed. Dom's voice cracked as he stepped forward. I'm not done, Marcus, he shouted. Marcus didn't turn around. He simply whispered, I am. But just before the door opened, just as the keys began to rattle on the other side, Marcus spoke one more time. I'm guilty. I did it all. I deserve everything they threw at me. I'm dead. Like I should have been a long time ago. Just get out of here, Dom. Look out for yourself. Goodbye. Then in a single breath before he disappeared through the threshold, Marcus glanced over his shoulder. One last time. You and Carlos, you were my family. That was the best of me. And that was it. That was the last time Dom ever saw him. Before Marcus vanished inside the slab. 4 years of silence. 4 years behind concrete and steel. 4 years buried in the dark.